All right, so this is presentation 3 from Unit 2, and this one we're looking at population and population patterns. So a lot of this is going to be key terms for the most part going through it. So currently right now the world population is around 7.6 billion people. So that means about 360,000 people are born each day, which is a giant amount. Only around 150,000 people die per day. So we're growing pretty rapidly. And then a term you need to know is birth rates, number of live births per thousand in a population, or per thousand births. So the highest is Niger in Africa at 44, which means they're having a lot of kids. So think, like basically 10 kids per family or so. The lowest is in Japan at just 8. And then if you want to look at the world population clock, which I show in class, you can go to that link there. You can just put in foodwaddle.com and you can get to the population clock from there. All right, more terms. Fertility rate. So that's the average number of children a woman of childbearing years would have in her lifetime. So the world average is 2.5, which means the population is growing. In order for that to get to where population would stay the same, you wouldn't see any growth, it would need to be at 2, because it takes 2 people to make a baby. And then you create 2 children, and then the idea is that the children are the replacement of the parents within the population. So anything above 2, you have a growing population. If it's below 2, you have a shrinking population. And of course, mortality rate's number of deaths per 1,000. So if you want to look at a population change, whether you're looking at global or you're looking within a country, you're going to take the birth rate, the mortality rate, and migration to figure that out. So whatever the birth rate is, and then subtract the mortality from that, and then migration, people moving in. So for example, here in the United States, we don't grow from birth rate. Our growth comes from migration alone. All right, then gender imbalances. So sometimes we will see a gender imbalance within a society. For example, during a war, you would see less men in a generation compared to the women of that same generation, because for the most part, it's majority men that are fighting on the front line, and therefore are killed more so. And then also during that time period, you would see low birth rates as well, because during a war or an economic depression or something like that, people tend to have less kids. And then some societies, they have a cultural preference for boys over girls. So we saw that with the one-child policy in China when that was active. You saw infanticide, where they would kill baby girls, or just they would be put up for adoption, put in orphanages and up for adoption. And so in China today, my generation in China, there's a lot more men than there are women. And then MDCs, that stands for most developed countries like the United States. Women tend to live longer, about 5 years or so longer. So when you look at the older subset of the population, you'll notice that there's more women than men when you get to that point. And you need to know what a population pyramid is. So down here, you'll see a population pyramid. This one, you see a lot of males between the ages of 25 and 40, not nearly as many females, and this is in United Arab Emirates. This is where Dubai is. So here, these are guest workers. They're bringing in men to work, engineers and things like that, because in the UAE, their education system hasn't quite caught up yet to where there's enough people in their own country to fill these jobs. And being a predominantly Muslim country, they tend to invite more men to work than they do women, and that's why you see a larger subset there. Looking and analyzing a population pyramid, which you'll need to be able to do because it's literally on every test, you need to get a general idea of what's going on in a country based on their population pyramid. So here, Kenya, for example, Kenya has a lot of kids. Not that many adults. So we know that the adults are having a lot of kids. They're giving birth to several, but they're dying at around the age of 40 for the most part. Not that many are living past that. So we know their healthcare system's not very good. We would know their education system's not very good because there's not enough teachers to teach all these kids down here. We know overall infrastructure would not be good. So roads, bridges, electricity, clean water, the healthcare system, all those things would not be doing that well there because there's not enough adults to run all that. Because, majority of the population is children, really. And so that's basically, if it's shaped like this, the country's not doing that well. It's going to be one of the least developed countries. The United States, you see it's nice and healthy, going all the way down. We're not having tons of kids. This is the baby boom in the 1950s and 60s. Then here we see just a nice decrease into death, and you notice the women live longer. And so here we know the education system is better. We know healthcare system is better. Overall infrastructure is going to be a lot better with this. So this is a healthy population. And here it's slow growth, if any. And then if you get this kind of population pyramid here, it's actually no growth at all. It's actually decreasing. So you notice here's the people making the babies. but there's way less kids, and so their population over time is shrinking. So the problem that Italy is going to run into is they're going to have an aging population. They won't have enough workers to fill in the gaps from the parents and the positions they're in at this point. And so economically, they're going to have a decrease in their economy going down the road. All right, more terms. Population density, of course, is the average number of people who live in a measurable area. Population distribution is how the population is distributed. Like here in the U.S., most people live in and around urban areas. We have large swaths of the country that are pretty empty and devoid of people. It's another way to look at it up here as well. Same thing when you look at distribution around the world. It's the same kind of thing. It's not spread out evenly whatsoever. Carrying capacity is the number of organisms a piece of land can support. So in this case, we look at people. How much land can the United States support as far as natural resources and food we can grow, and water, access to clean water, those kind of things. So for the Earth overall, most geographers and scientists say that our carrying capacity for this Earth is about 12 billion. Once we surpass 12 billion people on this Earth, we're going to start running out of clean water, food, and things like that. We'll hit our limit. So this looks at population distribution in the world. So you can see much heavier populations in South and East Asia, also in Europe, and then parts of the Americas. And this is showing you the 36 megacities that we have in the world. Most of them are in Asia. The ones in blue are in Asia. So the cities are down here. All these cities have over 10 million people. So that's one thing we've seen also is a big movement into cities. And so now we're seeing these megacities like never before, which also offers up new problems. Like how do we provide food for this many people when this many people aren't even farming? They're in the city relying on farmers and stuff like that to get food to them. Another way to look at population distribution is the world at night from space, satellite images. We can see where the lights are, electricity. Of course, this doesn't tell us the whole picture because there's several countries that are very poor that don't have electricity everywhere. So we can see where's their lack of infrastructure. So take Africa, for example. There's over 1 billion people in Africa, but if you were to look at where the electricity is, this does not represent 1 billion people. So we know that there's a large lack of infrastructure throughout Africa. As well. So that can give you an idea. If you know what the population is and you look at that, you can kind of get an idea of what the infrastructure is like. All right, and this shows growth here in the U.S. This is the United States in 1985. It's kind of hard to see where we are, but we're this spot down here. That's DFW. And then this is in the year 2000. So there's DFW again. You see all these new lights lighting up. So this is just 15 years of growth just in the United States. And I said a lot of this is migration for the most part, but look at all that was built up, and you can see this movement heading west still overall. All right, the last two things, these graphs, they will be on the test and on the quiz. So this is the J curve, and this is showing how we went from mostly human history, human population growing very slowly. Then the Black Death, 1347, 1351, wipes out a third to a half of humanity. But then after that, we start growing really fast, and then now we're at exponential growth. So the reason why this has happened is a couple of things. First off, advancements in medicine, especially vaccinations. Vaccinations single-handedly have totally changed how many kids we have and how many survive and continue to live into adulthood. The other thing is refrigeration. That gives us better access to food, especially proteins and things like that. So with better food, we have better nutrition, started living longer. And then really it's mainly those two things. So it's just better nutrition, and then with refrigeration especially, better access to proteins, and then advancements in medicine as well, especially antibiotics, outside of the vaccinations. That was a big one. All right, now this is the demographic transition model. So this one, there is a short answer question on the quiz over this. So this, you need to be able to explain how a country goes from stage 1 to stage 3. So your poorest countries on earth are in stage 1, which means their birth rate and death rate are really closely tied together. Sometimes there's more people dying than being born. So that means their population is steady, sometimes shrinking. But if it is increasing, it's very, very slowly. So this is agrarian societies that you don't see really any industry or anything like that there. And then you get to stage 2. Stage 2, this country is starting to industrialize now. They're going through an industrial revolution, basically. And people, because of that, are going to start moving to the cities away from the countryside to get access to better jobs. But at the beginning of this stage, you're going to see the death rate drop dramatically as they get better access to medication and better food and nutrition improves. But during that time, birth rates are still going to be pretty high because parents are still thinking they need to have, 15, 20 kids because half of them are going to die before the age of 5. But with better nutrition and medical care, those kids now are living. So you give birth to 15 kids, and now 12 of them live to adulthood, and that changes things. So people start having less kids. Also, people are making more money at this point. People have better access to education, and we know that when people have better access to education, especially women, birth rates always drop. And so, places where women have high educational attainment, we generally see a very low birth rate. So it begins to drop as they move through stage 2 and get closer and closer to a post-industrial economy, which is where the United States is right now. So as that happens, now people are getting higher end jobs, not in factories anymore, mainly in what would be called the service industry. Now birth rates are really low, but so is the death rate. So the population begins to steady out, and then as you progress into stage 3, it'll begin to drop. So a lot of European countries are in this part of stage 3 over here, where there's negative growth. So those countries are actually shrinking because people aren't having kids. Or if they do have a kid, they just have one. And so their populations are beginning to shrink. And that would be where the United States most likely is heading, is in that direction towards the negative growth. All right, and that's it for population. Again, your terms, obviously you need to know your terms, but definitely understand the J-curve, and then this model here, the demographic transition model, and what it looks like for a country to progress through that. So just be able to explain this model and what's happening in a country as this happens. All right, and that's it for population.